What we're looking at here is a robotic dog on the battlefields of Ukraine. This could be a scene straight out of science fiction, but is the new reality of war as robots join humans on the front lines in ever-increasing numbers. With its trenches, no man's lands and artillery barrages, Ukraine in some way resembles wars from 100 years ago. But in other ways, it looks unlike any war ever fought before. And nowhere is that more apparent than in the use of robots. So what exactly is a robot dog doing on the front lines? What does that tell us about how war is being fought right now? And is this what every war will look like in the future? We're going to examine this tape, break down how this robot works, and speak to a man who has seen them operate in the field to find out. Meet RoboDog. There's a few different versions in use in Ukraine, but this one is based on the Chinese Unitary 02, which is the same as the one you just saw in that tape. It's got 4 legs, each controlled by its own motor with pressure sensors in the paws. These limbs are powered by a computer brain that was trained using artificial intelligence. What that means is it's very skilled at walking. It can hop, skip, dance, and stand on its hind legs if you really want it to. But it also has practical skills, like climbing over obstacles, lying down, and jumping, which are much more useful on a battlefield. This dog can run at up to 10 miles an hour, helping it to evade enemies. The main body of the dog houses the battery, which powers the robot, giving it up to 4 hours of life before it needs to be recharged. There's a retractable strap which can secure an object to the dog's back, and it can comfortably lift 8 kilos, though that can be increased to 12 kilos in a pinch. When it's not carrying cargo, a robotic arm can also be fitted to the top of the dog, allowing it to lift and move objects. Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and 4G transmitters inside the body allow the dog to be controlled remotely. There's also a built-in intercom system, meaning the dog's controller can speak to anyone nearby, and they can speak back. Up here in the head are a bunch of sensors, cameras, and lights, which allow the robot and its controller to sense their surroundings. The large spinning semicircle on its chin is a LiDAR, or laser radar, which allows the robot to accurately map its surroundings. This gives the robot's controller an incredibly detailed map of anything the dog can see and helps the robot automatically avoid obstacles. In a controlled environment like a house, this would also allow the dog to take itself for a walk, following instructions from the owner. However, in an ever-changing environment like a battlefield, this feature is less useful. At the top is an HD camera, which allows whoever is controlling the dog to remotely see where they're going using an app. This is the primary way the dog finds its way around. And between the camera and the LiDAR is a torch, which can be turned on and off remotely to allow the dog's controller to see better. The dog weighs about 33 pounds, stands about 40 centimeters tall, and purchased off the shelf costs about $3,000, making it pretty cheap. If we go back to the tape, we can see all of that in action. This is the Khartiia Brigade, also known as the Billionaires Brigade. It is one of Ukraine's most advanced units and is becoming famous for its use of robots. One of those is the Unitary 02 model, which is being trained for combat missions. Here, you can see the dog activate and the LiDAR start spinning. Here's the cameras and torch, which allow the robot's controller to see what it's seeing. And here's what the world looks like from the dog's point of view. You can see how it uses its AI-powered brain to negotiate the rough terrain, and the various tricks it can do, like standing on its hind legs, jumping, and rolling over. You can also see the Ukrainians have covered theirs in camouflage paint. As well as disguising the dog to the naked eye, this paint job may well include material that is designed to reflect infrared cameras, making it harder for drones to spot. All of which is fascinating and kind of creepy. But what use is that in battle? Ukraine is currently locked into a war of attrition against its much bigger neighbor, and the winner will be whichever country can exhaust the other's resources first. One of the most important resources is manpower, and Ukraine, as with most things, is suffering a chronic shortage of it. Preserving the lives of its soldiers is therefore paramount, and Kiev's generals are willing to consider any solution that keeps them out of harm's way. And that's where the robots come in. RoboDog's primary role is reconnaissance. In war, soldiers need continuous real-time information about where their enemies are and what they're doing, or else they risk being caught by surprise and killed. In the wars of the past, armies had to use human scouts to gather that intelligence. That meant putting someone in harm's way, and whether they were on foot, in a vehicle, or in the skies, there was a chance they'd be killed. The first attempt to solve this problem was with satellites, because they're unmanned and too far away to shoot with all but the most sophisticated of missiles. But they have some crucial drawbacks. They're expensive to build and launch, meaning they're only available to a handful of countries. Unless they're equipped with infrared cameras, they can be blocked by clouds, trees, or anything else that obscures their vision, and even very sophisticated satellite networks that have appeared in recent years only update their images every 6 hours or so. An age of time on the battlefield. Ukraine's answer to this problem has been drones, which are now a permanent feature in the skies over the battlefields. It is thought that several thousand of them are in the air at any one time, feeding a constant stream of information back to command posts so leaders can make life or death decisions. But, just like satellites, these aren't foolproof. They struggle to fly in high winds, could be jammed using electronic warfare, and could also be blinded by clouds or tree cover. If the thing they're trying to spy on can't be seen from the air, then the drone is of no use. That's where alternatives like RoboDog come in. Being close to the ground, the dog can see a lot that the drones can't. Minefields and tripwires, for instance, that might prove lethal to soldiers if they were to walk into them unawares. They can also navigate dense urban environments where aerial drones would struggle to maneuver. Fighting in close quarters like this is lethal. In every building and around every corner could be an enemy. In the wars of the past, the only way to find these enemies was for soldiers to poke their heads around those corners and into those buildings, risking getting it shot off. But not anymore. Robot dogs can be sent to check for danger without risking anyone's life. That's not just the case in buildings, but also in tree lines, which is where the Ukrainians and Russians both tend to dig their trenches. Assaulting trenches is deadly work, unless, of course, you have a ground drone that can scout out the trench network first. The robodogs can also perform other roles, like resupply. Suppose you're attacking a building or a tree-lined trench, but get into trouble. You've run out of ammo or have to deal with a casualty. At the moment, this means sending more soldiers into the fight to bring up extra ammunition and medical supplies, putting them in danger. But drones like RoboDog can carry enough weight to bring the supplies instead. This job can't be done by aerial drones because these can carry just a few kilos at a time. If we take a look at some additional battlefield footage, you can see that's exactly what the Ukrainians are training the dog drones to do. Here's Khartiia Company, a unit with Ukraine's 28th Brigade, using a robot dog to help them scout out an urban environment. The soldiers are able to stick to cover up against the side of buildings or underneath trees, while the dog is sent out into the open spaces between the buildings where the soldiers might get shot to scout out enemy positions. Photos from the same training exercise show it was also being taught how to scout out buildings alongside the troops. Khartiia Company also trained their RoboDog to navigate a wooded environment, such as a Russian tree line. The robot handles this less well, but is still good enough to potentially save the life of its master. These images show they also tested the dog drone's carrying capacity, loading it up with medical supplies to carry up to the front line. And this video shows a terrifying vision of what war might look like if the dogs are trained to attack rather than defend. Someone has fitted a flamethrower to the back of the dog, where the robotic arm mount usually goes, turning the machine into a potentially lethal killer. There's no evidence that robot attack dogs have been used on the battlefield yet. But we do know that both the Chinese and the Russians have investigated the possibility of mounting rocket launchers and machine guns to these machines. Which begs the question, are we heading for a future where robots fight alongside humans? In one sense, we're already living in that reality. The longer the war in Ukraine drags on, the more common drones and other robots are becoming on the battlefield. First came the aerial drones, used for scouting and dropping explosives on the enemy. At the start of the war, these were rare, but now they're everywhere. Then came the FPVs, a kamikaze adaptation of this technology, which have become the go-to weapon for precision strikes on Russian tanks. These drones regularly fight alongside human soldiers. The standard defense against a Russian attack these days is to hit it with FPVs before it even reaches Ukrainian lines. Only then do the humans enter the fight, battling whatever is left of the Russian assault, before grenade-dropping drones are dispatched to finish off any survivors. The FPVs were also adapted for use at sea, where they completely replaced manned warships. Drones like the Magura 5 and Sea Baby sank or damaged at least 8 Russian vessels, all without a single sailor being deployed into the field. The next innovation is ground drones, like RoboDog and these other slightly less sophisticated models being used by the Khartiia Brigade. These robots are armed with grenade launchers, machine guns, landmines, and other explosives, and their intent is to replace humans. The technology is trickier to master because it's harder for robots to navigate uneven ground than it is for them to fly or sail, but they've met with some success. Late last year, Khartiia claimed to have carried out the world's first robot-only attack on a Russian position. 50 robots took part in the attack. Ground drones packed with explosives and topped with machine guns, FPVs, and aerial drones watching the whole thing unfold. Over the course of 5 hours, they attacked and destroyed a Russian position near the town of Lipsy, which was later taken by the Ukrainians. That's quite an achievement. Other Ukrainian units are now said to be preparing versions of the same mission, suggesting this kind of combat is about to become a lot more common. But this is still humans fighting other humans. All of these drones are being controlled by people who are making the decisions about where to go and what to attack. The step beyond that is to allow the robots to do the fighting themselves. That may sound far-fetched, but it's something Ukraine is already working on. This video shows an artificial intelligence being used to determine targets for an FPV drone to attack, and similar tests have been run on a machine gun drone as well. It's terrifying to think about, but robots which can think for themselves are probably not all that far away from being deployed in battle, which means there's a plausible future emerging in which attack dogs like this are unleashed. Wars that once seemed like a far-off fantasy may actually be very close at hand. Next, we spoke to a journalist who spent time with the Khartiia Brigade and saw RoboDog in action.
I'm Richard Pendlebury, and I'm the reporter for the Mail's Ukraine Frontline films.
What can you tell us about RoboDog?
It's very dystopian. The RoboDog, it's a quadruped. It's not Ukrainian developed. It's from a Chinese firm called Unitree, and it's called, I think it's called the Go-To. And you can get them off the shelf for just a little over £2,000, $2,500. And it was developed really as a recreational, fun thing. But you can see that it might have other functions or purposes. What makes the RoboDog different, apart from being very strange and dystopian and looking like a sci-fi dog, is that it does have a built-in camera in what looks like its head. So obviously it could be, and they have been using it as a frontline reconnaissance drone. They're able to do things that would normally involve putting a soldier, a human being, in grave jeopardy. £2,000 drone, it might sound a lot. It's not compared to the cost of some of the aerial drones and all the other kit that they're using. If they can get it into a Russian frontline position, and it's feeding live video footage of the position back to its pilot, and it can do it. Some of them, the drone that I was with, had apparently been on several combat missions. It wasn't just a one-way trip for these dogs. They do come back. But as I said, it's not perfect. It wasn't designed for the military. That said, apparently the US Marine Corps and the Chinese Army have both tested it, an armed version of RoboDog. One is with an assault rifle, and the other one had some kind of anti-tank rocket. So the next step after that will be a totally AI. And then it becomes really kind of Blade Runner, totally dystopian and quite scary.
I know the Ukrainians are working on AI with their aerial drones. Can you tell us anything about the kind of way that Ukraine is thinking about AI and trying to integrate it?
Initially, it's teaching the drone to recognize shapes. The drone pilot would be on a long-range reconnaissance, would be having to stare at the screen for hours. Well, not hours, but you would need a whole rotation of people, and there's human failing. You get tired, you miss stuff, but a really good pilot will know what kind of shapes, camouflage shapes, things that he's looking for in a bush. That's a tank or something. You can teach that through AI to the drone, and the drone never gets tired. I mean, it's artificial intelligence. It doesn't get tired, and it could fly for 24 hours, and just keep recognizing hidden objects or vehicles, stuff like that. That is how the aerial drone AI was progressing when I was talking with the guys. You can also train them to hunt live soldiers, which is when it becomes
Really dystopian.
Really dystopian. But I'm sure that will happen.
And then there's obviously the potential to plug that kind of hunter-killer AI into a robot dog.
Oh, undoubtedly. Yeah. I mean, if they continue with I think it's a trial. I think it's not an experiment. They're trialing it, they're using it. But if they feel it's worth carrying on, yeah, of course, that's the next step. And the technology in this war in particular is just like bounding on. It's so fast. I mean, the Second World War, the way everything sped up was amazing. But I think we're seeing similar things in Ukraine, where everything it's being tested on the battlefield as it comes.
What can you tell us about the brigade? What it's like, who's in it, how it operates, how it came to be?
Well, Khartiia Brigade, as its name suggests, it's from the Kharkiv Oblast, from the city, and they didn't exist before the full-scale invasion. They were formed initially as a battalion, and they were funded by an agro-billionaire, a local guy, very, very rich, and they earned the nickname the Billionaires Battalion. And they are still part of the Ukrainian National Guard, so it's kind of like a reservist thing, but right from the get-go, they wanted to be super professional.
What can you tell us about how the kind of tactics they're using and the kind of technologies they're employing?
Their precepts they're very much based on the NATO model. It's not so rigid as the old Soviet doctrine, which was followed by a lot of the Ukrainian units, to be honest, and obviously still is by the Russian army. So there is a lot of prep on operations, either defensive or offensive, a lot of prep. They will start on a large scale where there'll be maps. They'll do a bigger map like a sand pit. They'll walk their officers and NCOs through it. Then before the operation starts, there will be a full-scale dress rehearsal where the troops, the vehicles will go through it, and only then, once they're satisfied, will an operation be launched. Now, Khartiia have kind of grasped this evolving technology like no other brigade, I think, partly because they are quite a young brigade. If you think that the average combat age of a Ukrainian army soldier is 43, which is incredibly high. The average age of a soldier in the Khartiia Brigade is around about 31, they tell me. And so Khartiia have really got it that Gen Z are the people who best understand this evolving robot technology, and they are using them as the leaders in that particular sector. The ground drones they're developing, and most of the drones they're using are Ukrainian designed. They're then given to Khartiia, and then Khartiia, the special unit there, then develops them further for their own military purposes. A lot of them are like radio-controlled chariots. So they're moving stuff. It might be quite boring, but some of them they vary in size from very small to the size of a small cart in environments where a vehicle or a human in a vehicle would be under tremendous degree of threat. You lose a ground drone to a drone strike or an artillery strike. It's annoying, but it's not fatal. And those are sort of the logistics side of it, which is so important on the battlefield. Getting the supplies, the ammunition, the medicine, everything to the guys in the front line is becoming more and more difficult. And these ground drones, particularly the ones that are just shifting stuff, are incredibly important. The smaller ones can be adapted also as a sort of ground suicide drone. They can be, and we're talking robots that are just this big and are pretty good over rough ground, radio controlled, and they can be rigged up with explosives, and they can be just driven at the Russian positions.
That's where this tape stops, but we'll be back soon to play you through another episode of War on Tape. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you want more videos like this in your feed, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.